Seldom set foot in your neighbour's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. A man who bears false witness against his neighbour is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share another proverb from Solomon, as recorded in Proverbs chapter 25, verses 17 and 18. Seldom set foot in your neighbour's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. A man who bears false witness against his neighbour is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. We all live in community. We all have neighbours. Often we don't choose our neighbours. We might choose the house in which we live in, but when we choose it, we don't know what our neighbours will be like. We might choose to live in a better neighbourhood, but that doesn't guarantee that our neighbours are good, even as living in a poorer neighbourhood means that our neighbours will be bad. What the proverb is saying is that we need to respect our neighbour. Yes, we are to be neighbourly towards them and help them when they need help and support them, but seldom set foot in your neighbour's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. We can sometimes think that we enjoy a person's company. Enjoy it when you have the opportunity, but don't wear out your welcome. Or we might be too controlling of our neighbour, thinking that they should do this and do that. There's so many issues between neighbours that there's even TV programs talking about the neighbours from hell. Well, we need to respect our neighbours. Indeed, Jesus emphasised the fact that we are to love our neighbour as ourselves. And when challenged who was our neighbour, told the story of the Good Samaritan. It included those who are nominally our enemies. Usually when we talk about enemies, we're not talking about a specific person, but we're talking about a class of people to which we do not belong. So we might imagine that the communists are our enemies, or the Chinese are our enemies. Not that we have anything in particular against any particular Chinese person, but we recognise there is a regime that is seeking to undermine the lifestyle that we have. Of course, there are others seeking to undermine our lifestyle as well that we may not recognise as our enemies. So we are to deal with people on an individual basis, is what Jesus said. You love your neighbour as yourself. It is the person that you encounter in life. But you don't wear out your welcome, according to this proverb. Seldom set foot in your neighbour's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. But then the next proverb says, a man who bears false witness against his neighbour is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Remember the commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbour. And this proverb is reinforcing that. A man who bears false witness against his neighbour is like a club, a sword, or a sharp arrow. He is attacking them just as if he hit them with a club, or struck them with a sword, or shot them with an arrow. To bear false witness means to say something bad about a person which is not justified, or with intent to cause them harm. When you are called to bear testimony before a court, it is important that you speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But a false witness is one who seeks to cause harm to his neighbour by the testimony. But if you seek to cause harm to your neighbour, then in fact you are causing harm to yourself. In Nazi Germany, it was common for people to tell on their neighbours so that they could make themselves look good in the eyes of the Nazis. I also think this commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbour, covers the case of saying things about your neighbour designed to cause them trouble. And this is what this proverb is suggesting. It's like a club, a sword, a sharp arrow. You're bashing them over the head. You're spearing them You're injuring them. You're injuring their reputation. You are causing trouble to them, and you're probably doing so for your own advantage rather than because it is the truth. One of the classic stories in the scriptures about this was King Ahab. His father had taken over some land to build a new city, the city of Samaria, on a virgin site. And so there was a lot of building going on. And part of the land in this vicinity belonged to Naboth. He had a vineyard there. But Ahab thought, I would like that land as my vegetable patch. It would make a good and convenient vegetable garden for my palace. So he asked Naboth could he buy the land. But Naboth said, no, this land has been in my family for hundreds of years. It is my territory land. I don't want to go anywhere else. I'm happy to stay here. What you do in your territory is your business, but this land has been given to me by God, and I see no reason why I should move. Well, Ahab got very sullen and upset about this because he really coveted that land. And his wife Jezebel saw that he was out of sorts and said, what's the problem, Ahab? And he sulked, Naboth won't sell his land to me. To which Jezebel said, leave it to me. And she wrote a letter to the elders of the city and said, hold a big dinner and make sure you invite Naboth to come along. And then during the course of the dinner, have some people accuse Naboth of blaspheming God. This is what they did. And Naboth was stoned for blaspheming God because somebody bore false witness. It was all a set-up. It was all abusing the law, accusing a person of blaspheming. Of course, this is how they executed the Lord Jesus, accusing him of blaspheming God. So blasphemy laws are really none of our business at all. Consider the story of Gideon. The Lord told him to chop down the pagan altar that his father had built, that the people in the village were worshipping. He was a bit scared, and so he did it in the middle of the night, and when the people got up in the morning, there was their God being burned in the fire. And they came to Gideon's father and said, hand over your son. We must execute him because he's blasphemed our God. But Gideon's father said, if he's a God, let him judge Gideon himself. And of course nothing happened to Gideon because this was just a bit of wood. There was no God at all. But even today, people are being killed or put in prison under blasphemy laws because they choose to acknowledge the Lord Jesus rather than some other pagan god. Whenever a person is accused of blaspheming God, let God judge that person if he is a god. Let us not pretend that we have the right to judge for the honour of God, except, of course, in the manner of our own living, for we are to live in a way that brings glory to him. Well, here, a man who bears false witness against his neighbour is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. We are not to bear false witness against our neighbour, and we are not to hang around our neighbour so that he becomes weary of us. Rather, we have neighbours so that in time of need we can support one another. Jesus told a couple of parables referring to neighbours. In Luke 14, he said to those who had invited him to a meal, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbours, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. In this situation, he is showing how we are to love our neighbours, that is, those who are the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, rather than be exclusive and just invite our friends and brothers and relatives and rich neighbours to a supper. For we have the poor with us always, and we can do good to them whenever we will. will.